In the bitter winter of February 1511, within the cold walls of Richmond Palace, a young and vigorous king, Henry VIII, held tightly in his arms his newborn son. He was not just a child, but a symbol of hope, the thread binding together the future of an entire dynasty. 7 weeks earlier, the newborn cry of Prince Henry Tudor had set all of England ringing with church bells, flames blazing on every street, and the belief that the age of turmoil had finally closed forever. But on that fateful morning, it all vanished. The fragile breath of the child faded away, leaving behind a void that no throne, nor prayer, and no victory could ever fill. No one in that chamber knew that, from that very moment, the fate of England would turn onto a blood-stained path where fatherly love would be twisted into an obsession with power, where religious faith would be torn apart, and where a young king would become one of the most notorious figures in history. On the first day of the year, 1511, London was filled with light and sound. From before the sun had risen, church bells rang out across the streets, blending with the cheers of thousands of people. Queen Catherine of Aragon had just given birth to a healthy boy, Prince Henry Tudor, Duke of Cornwall, the child that both court and people had long awaited for many years. For Henry VIII, only 19 years old, this was an absolute triumph. The Tudor dynasty, only recently secured after long years of civil war, now had a legitimate heir. The king did not merely want to celebrate, he wanted all of Europe to know that the English throne was now safe. In the days that followed, Westminster Palace became the stage for festivities more lavish than ever seen before. In the golden torchlight, Henry himself donned shining armor, riding a white horse into the lists. Each lowering of the lance, each bow to the audience, was like a declaration. This is a dynasty that will last for centuries. Beyond the palace, the common people also shared the joy. Banquet tables stretched across the streets, with free ale and pies, while churches across the realm held Thanksgiving services. But in the shadows of that jubilation, troubling signs emerged. Some servants whispered that the prince coughed often, slept poorly, and sometimes whimpered weakly. Physicians reassured that these were only natural reactions of a newborn in the harsh winter cold. Yet at Richmond Palace, where the prince was being raised, worry grew silently. Through the long nights, candles in the prince's chamber never went out. People believed that light and the scent of herbs like rosemary and sage could ward off evil spirits. Wet nurses washed their hands with wine before lifting the child. Astrologers were summoned to read the stars, affirming a glorious future awaited. But no spell could alter the truth. The prince's health was failing. By early February, the situation turned grave. The once rosy face of the infant grew pale. His breath labored, his cries reduced to faint whimpers. Physicians employed the medical practices of the time, bloodletting, mixtures of ground pearls and honey, but all only drained his strength further. Queen Catherine began to spend sleepless nights beside her son's cradle, whispering prayers in Spanish. Henry VIII refused to accept reality, continuing to order festivals, as if denial might drive away the calamity. On the morning of the 23rd of February 1511, in heavy silence, the prince breathed his last after only 52 days of life. In his mother's arms, the boy passed away, leaving behind a terrible void that no throne could ever fill. The news spread quickly through London. The streets, once echoing with cheers, now fell utterly silent. The prince's funeral took place at Westminster Abbey, with all the rites of royalty. Yet the coffin was small, no more than a child's chest draped in white damask. Henry and Catherine followed close behind, but between them there was no touch of hand. Only two faces closed in grief and distance. Yet this was not merely a family tragedy. The death of the child rekindled old fears about the fragility of the Tudor throne. From that moment, a dark seed was planted in the mind of Henry VIII, the obsession with a male heir at any cost. In the years that followed, that obsession would grow into political ambition, ignite the break with the Roman Catholic Church, and become the reason why the blood of queens, nobles, and even close friends would be shed. After the funeral, the atmosphere in the palace seemed shrouded in a cold mist. Henry VIII returned to affairs of state, but he was no longer the smiling, exuberant young king of the first months of his reign. The pain of losing his son turned into a constant unease, a haunting fear that the Tudor dynasty, which had stood firm for less than 3 decades, might collapse at any moment if he did not have a male heir. Queen Catherine, though still dignified and devoted, could not escape her husband's scrutinizing gaze. Each subsequent pregnancy became a brutal ordeal. Miscarriages, stillbirths, or infants who died young, each time tore her heart apart and eroded her standing at court. For Henry, each failure was a bitter reminder of that winter morning in 1511. The disappointment and pressure to produce a son transformed Henry from a passionate husband into a cold monarch. He began to seek out young maids of the court, not only to satisfy desire, but also to find another chance for the Tudor bloodline. Rumors spread through the palace corridors. If Catherine could not bear a son, the throne needed another queen. Meanwhile, Henry began to expand his power in unprecedented ways. At first, he offered more gold and silver to the church, made pilgrimages, and requested special prayers, hoping that God would grant him a male heir. But when these efforts failed, his patience with Rome wore thin. He began to question, was the Pope's power truly absolute, or merely a political net restraining a king like him? It was during this time that Anne Boleyn entered Henry's life. Young, sharp, and skilled at challenging the king, Anne did not rush to give herself. Instead, she offered a sweet promise she could bear him strong sons. That promise was like a balm to the wound that had never healed in Henry's mind. From a personal loss, Henry transformed it into the reason to alter the very foundation of England's power. He sought to annul his marriage with Catherine, but the Pope, bound by the pressure of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, Catherine's nephew, refused. To Henry, this was an unforgivable insult. As the years passed, his resolve hardened. If Rome would not permit, he would permit himself. From this arose the king's great matter, a chain of events that would tear apart centuries of ties between England and the Catholic Church. Henry declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, dissolved the monasteries, seized church property, and executed anyone who opposed him, even close friends such as Thomas More. But even after breaking down so many religious barriers, Henry could not escape the ghost of his lost son. Anne Boleyn too could not give him a surviving prince. That harsh truth pushed him into a cycle of hope and despair, where every marriage, every decree, every execution carried the shadow of that small white coffin from long ago. From then on, Henry was not merely a king. He became a symbol of absolute power, and also a living testament to how a single personal loss could shape the destiny of an entire nation. In May 1536, the scaffold at the Tower of London sank into a chilling silence. Anne Boleyn, the woman who had driven Henry VIII to challenge the Pope and alter the religious destiny of England, knelt before the block. She was convicted of adultery and treason, charges that many historians believe were political tools to free the king from a marriage that had failed to give him a male heir. With a single stroke of a French swordsman, the Queen's slender neck fell to history, and with it vanished the hope Henry had once placed in Anne. Only a few days later, the king remarried Jane Seymour, a gentlewoman praised as the new light of the court. And this time, Henry gained what he had long desired for 25 years, a prince. In 1537, Edward was born. The whole kingdom rejoiced. But that joy soon turned to mourning when Jane died, only 12 days after childbirth. Henry grieved her sincerely. But above all, he became ever more obsessed with protecting his fragile son, the only one who could secure the Tudor throne. After Jane, Henry married 4 more times. Anne of Cleves, a failed political alliance, annulled after only 6 months. Catherine Howard Young, reckless, executed for adultery. Finally, Catherine Parr, the wife who survived Henry's death, but who also had to tread carefully among the tempests of an aging, ailing, and suspicious king. Every marriage, every choice of wife, revolved around one single purpose: to produce or safeguard a son. Since the death of the infant prince in 1511, Henry lived in fear of that tragedy, repeating the fear that the Tudor dynasty would collapse without a strong male heir. It was this fear that shaped an entire reign, breaking international alliances, severing ties with Rome, burning monasteries, and sending not a few close companions to the gallows or the executioner's block. For Henry VIII, every throne, every law, every life could be sacrificed. So long as one thing was secured, the Tudor bloodline carried through a prince. And it was this very obsession that left the deepest mark on English history, a scar remembered for centuries to come.